Hi there. Let's finish up with the second of the AP review questions regarding confidence intervals. So on this question, read the setup, read both parts A and B. Most of the work is in part A. There's just a little bit of interpretation then in part B. So ultimately, this is a yes or no question. Are sufficient funds available to estimate the mean stopping distance to within 2 feet? So there's the margin of error, plus or minus 2 feet of the true mean mu, with 95% confidence. Now, something that makes this question a little bit different when it comes to means, we are told that preliminary studies, preliminary work, for some reason or another, they believe that if you look at the distribution of stopping distances in general for this particular type of break, I'm not talking about the means, I'm talking about the population of stopping distances for this particular type of break. They believe that the standard deviation is 12 feet for stopping distances. So if we're going to take that as sigma, as the population standard deviation, I do not need to use t-scores here. I can go ahead and use z-scores, which simplifies the problem just slightly. So for 95% confidence, the margin of error would be built using a z-score of 1.960. Here's the population standard deviation of 12. We would divide by the square root of n, and we would want that to be less than or equal to the margin of error, which was specified in the question, plus or minus 2. So again, two things. This is the standard error for sample means. This is the standard deviation of the sampling distribution for sample means. The population standard deviation divided by the square root of n. Notice I do not need to use the sample standard deviation. I'm not actually given it in the question. I don't have the data to calculate it. I am forced to use the population standard deviation, which means this is not a question involving t-scores. I'll have to use z-scores here. So solving this, again, to simplify your life, you can ignore the plus and minus. You can just go straight to equality because that's what we're really interested in. So the 1.960 times the 12 gives me this numerator of the square root of n. That would equal 2. A little cross multiplying and solving, you end up with a little bit more than 138, which would have to round to 139 observations. So explain your answer means A, you have to include your work. You need to show how you set up this calculation, and then you need to give a written explanation. It is a yes or no question, so say yes or no. This is no. Sufficient funds are not available, and here's the explanation. So a margin of error of plus or minus 2 feet at 95% confidence, that will require 139 observations. But the proposed budget will only allow for 12,000 divided by 100, or 120 observations. That's why we don't have sufficient funds. Notice in the question, you're given the budget of 12,000. You're also told that each observation is going to cost you $100. So you need 139 observations to get the correct margin of error, but in fact, the 12,000 divided by 100 only allows for 120. So there is an alternate way to do this question. If you go ahead and take the 12,000 and divide by 100, you have a maximum of 120 observations. So you could just calculate the margin of error using the maximum number of observations. So there's again the z-score, there's the population standard deviation of 12 divided by the square root of 120. The margin of error, the best that you could do using all 120 observations that you can afford is plus or minus 2.147. So again, that would be another way to approach this. No, sufficient funds are not available because the budget allows for no more than 120 observations. And with that, the best that you can do is get a margin of error of plus and minus 2.147. Your goal was plus and minus 2. So ultimately then, for the last question, there's quite a bit, I suppose, that you could write, and here is my answer. I'll let you take a look at it. I wrote way too much, but really the two things that you need to indicate are that the budget is not sufficient in order to meet the regulatory requirements. So the consequence is that the manufacturer will not be able to meet the requirements. Those are the two things that you need to discuss here. The budget's not big enough, which means that the company will not be able to meet the regulatory requirements. So I wrote, with that budget, no more than 120 observations are possible. You need 139 to achieve the right margin of error. You can't meet the regulatory requirements because you'd really need a budget of 13,900 to get the right sample size.